paying attention to them. You want good grades in school? You want a girl? You want a girl? Listen to it. Bill Clinton is the best.
I have to tell my son this
Bill Clinton was the greatest seducer of women and men in history because he would sit and listen to women. When I grew up, I thought of drink beer and brag.
It's more important to listen to women than to listen to men?
Well, you have different interests. Ha! No, really, Bill Clinton once said to a guy...
It's harder to listen to women.
A guy was going to... No.
For men?
It's harder.
Okay.
I've been accused of interrupting women on my show more than men. I see the problem. But Bill Clinton once told a friend...
Why is that?
Let me just finish the point as I interrupt you. The key is that Bill Clinton... He once said to a guy who was in love with this woman, he couldn't get to first base with her, he said, do you ever try listening? They find it flattering. And so I'm sure Bill Clinton would say, you know, you have a very poetic way of talking. Did anyone ever tell you that? The way you put words together. I could just listen for hours. I didn't do it with a southern accent, but that's how you do it.
You did it well, though.
And he's
so
good
have
at that.
you used that?
No, I don't do that. I'm just saying you ought to do it. Hillary's used it in New York. Her listening to her got her elected. He taught her to listen. She's not a natural. He is. He taught her to be a politician and to listen. And she's a lot easier to take now. 10 years ago, she'd bump into you and say, I just got back from Africa for a week. Implication, I'm an African expert. And she'd start telling you all about Africa. Wait a minute. She didn't stop to ask, have you ever been to Africa? Like I spent more than 2 years there, living there. She didn't care because she was a know-it-all. Today, she comes up to you and says, I met your daughter the other day. Let me tell you, my daughter's at Penn now. She'd say, she'd talk to me all about my daughter. Great interest, great information about my daughter. She's a listener. She pays attention now. If she does health care, she'll do it much better than she did last time because she pays attention.
So you can learn how to pay attention.
You have to learn.
Yeah.
Third thing, you have to listen. You have to ask. I think you have to deal with rivalry. That's another thing the Clintons teach you, is the willingness to recognize that if you want something, somebody else probably wants it. And they have just as much a right to want it as you do. So don't let it get personal. Live with it. Grin when you fight. When you see them, smile. When you have to deal with them, say hello. Try to establish a personal relationship with the people you got to contend with.
You have a story about
By the way,
Tip
when you go to
O'Neill
law school, you got to do it. You got to go to law school. You got to deal with the fact that everybody else wants a better grade than you do. What, are you going to sit around and be a grump? You're going to be miserable. You're going to curse them when you go to bed at night. Root for their deaths.
Could you tell that story about Reagan and Tip O'Neill?
You mean at the hospital?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know about that until David Broder of the Post wrote about it, and I got more out of it from the oral history. Ronald Reagan suffered an assassination attempt in 1981, as everyone knows, and he was in much worse shape than anyone thought. He had lost half his blood. He barely made it to the hospital, but his adrenaline allowed him to tell a few jokes. But he was in very bad shape, and a couple weeks afterwards, after the operation, and he had a bullet very close to his heart, Jim Baker, who was the chief of staff to Reagan, said he'd let some people in to see him, just to begin the process of meeting people and showing that he's alive and everything. And he let Tip O'Neill in because Tip was the leader of the opposition, the top Democrat in the country, and the Speaker of the House, in line to the presidency. And Max Friedersdorf, who was the head of congressional relations, was sort of watching over Reagan, was sitting across the room from Tip, and he recorded this in the University of Virginia oral histories. He looked across the room and he saw Tip O'Neill, the leader of the opposition, this big guy, kneeling on the floor next to Reagan's bed. He kissed Reagan, and then he held hands with him the longest time as the two of them together recited the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That was my story. It made me very happy to hear that story.
It's quite a story. That's a story about rivals who can, nonetheless,
being a human being.
Cooperate.
Being a human being, being a mensch. Yeah. I mean, being somebody in the end, because I always say to myself when I'm really mad at somebody or jealous of them or figure they're out to get me, which is fairly common, if that person were in a traffic accident, I'd do everything to help them. I mean, who am I kidding? Why am I pretending they're my enemy? I mean, I would do everything I could to help them. Why am I pretending I'm not? I don't like the rivalry. I wish they weren't coming for what I got. Or I'd like to have what they have, maybe.
So you take the larger perspective.
I try to teach myself that.
And yet it's hard
it's only personal because you're going after the same target. You know, but it's kind of hard to sometimes separate the two. But you know, when I first met Ronald Reagan, I was Tip O'Neill's AA, and I was at this big desk out in front of the ceremonial office off the floor of the Capitol, off the floor of the House floor where the President gives the State of the Union address. And he was in the room there. So I walked in the room to welcome him. And this is the President of the United States. And this is like the State of the Union after he was shot, 82. And I said, Mr. President, welcome to the room where we plot against you. I really did say that. And he goes, oh no, not after 6. The speaker says we're all friends here after 6.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I thought that was just sort of towel snapping, locker room towel snapping. And then I realized, no, they've been through this thing at the hospital. They know something about each other that nobody else knows. Mm-hmm. Their common humanity. Mm-hmm. And Reagan, in a book I put in there about Reagan and his diaries, which have just come out thanks to Doug Brinkley, the historian, where Reagan said after a St. Patrick's Day party with Tip, he said, Tip's a real pal. He can really like you, but he can also try to dock your head off. And I like that politics. I really like it. I like the fact that you can disagree and really fight with the other person, but still be a mensch.
And not take it personally. I think that's an
Trying
interesting
not to. And I think kids growing up in their 20s and 30s, especially on college politics, I got hung up in that. Don't let it get personal. Some stupid race for class president or something. Don't let it create a scar. Somehow you got to recognize, hey, you both want the same thing. Does that put the other person down? They want what you want. That's the big deal. Beat them.
Yeah.
Don't hate them. Beat them.
So tell me, how
And by the way, I do teach people how to win elections in this book, and I'm not going to tell them until they buy the book, but there is a
Okay.
way how to win an election there. And you win it, and my daughter just won a class presidency with that. It's doable.
But you also say that even if you lose, you come back and you run again. And
Well, if you like Arlen
Specter,
Specter, you're
Specter
Bobby
as an
Casey here.
example. Yeah.
I mean, Arlen Specter ran, I voted for him when he ran for DA against Jim Tate. I know he ran for mayor, I voted for him back in, the 60s. First time I voted for him for mayor. He's still running. He's going to run till he drops, But, he'll be like Bobby Bird over there at some point. He's never going to quit. But he's a pretty formidable character, and so was Bob Casey, the late governor. He ran. They used to call him the 3-time loss from Holy Cross because he ran 3 times for governor. And he went to my college, and he wouldn't quit. And his kid's now running for everything, probably. His kid runs every 2 years, doesn't he? I mean, and Bobby's a senator now because he kept trying.
So you admire that?
Well, I just think that trying is a prerequisite to winning. It may not guarantee victory, but it's very rare that you see somebody who wins without really trying. Yeah. My experience, I don't know about yours, my experience in life is most people get to where they get. Even somebody like Kate Hepburn, I was reading about her today, the great actress. You think it's so natural from the outside, and then you read their notes, their diary notes, and you realize how everything they did was work. Everything they did, Robert Frost would sit with a thesaurus. Hemingway had a thesaurus. I think there's one picture of him trying to figure out the white word. He had 30 titles for The Sun Also Rises. 30 titles he was working until he finally came up with The Sun Also Rises, out of the Bible. I mean, it's most people work. People I work with, Tim Russert works very hard. Yeah. Brian Williams, they work. They're doing this debate tonight. They work very hard. They do a lot of preparation.
I want to ask you about that. How do you prepare for this event? It's
well,
such
what
a
we did, I
spectacle.
did a debate like this out in Dearborn, Michigan a couple weeks ago before this debate, and I have to tell you, you get a lot of help from producers and the political director, Chuck Todd, and everybody has question ideas. And then at the end, I didn't get nervous then. I got nervous at the Reagan Library debate I did out there. Nancy Reagan was there, and Schwarzenegger was there, and it was at the Reagan Library. I get nervous last time with Maria Bartiromo. I was only afraid the Republicans were going to come at me because I had said a few things before that debate. They were going to come at me, but they didn't. Well, the things you worry about most, as Churchill, my hero, again said, the biggest things the worst things that ever happened to you never happen. They know they're going to happen. You think they're going to happen, they don't happen.
Right. One more question. You say that you're a Philadelphia boy, and you say.
Can't you tell?
Yeah, I can tell.
It's not as bad a Philly accent as I was born with, but when I come back here, I hear it everywhere. It's just everywhere. It's a totally different way of speaking the English language than anybody else.
And it's fast.
That's one reason why I talk so fast. And it's talk, it's coffee, it's please, applause.
But
it's also worse, like Huntington Park. If you look up on the street sign, it says Hunting Park. Hunting Park. There's 2 syllables, but everybody says Huntington Park. But you look at the sign and you still say Huntington Park. Or you say St. Joe's. No, it's St. Joe's. It's St. Joe's. It's not St. Joe's. I mean, where did we have an extra syllable, and then we dropped the syllable in Philadelphia. It's not Philadelphia, it's Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I mean, the Eagles. I can't even say the Eagles the way most people say
Down
the
the
Eagles.
shore.
The Eagles. I mean, there's so many pronunciations that we do differently than everybody else.
But what about style? You've said that you
fast.
But Blaine, is it that pugnacious,
it's also,
interrupting, hard-hitting
Excuse
style?
me, it's the Eagles games. I mean, geez.
Oh,
when I grew up at Connie
game.
Mack Stadium, there was trash in left field. You could tell the Phillies were losing because there was trash out there. There was booing, booing Pete Rose.
Are you still an Eagles
booing
fan?
Pete Rose before the gambling started. Booing him just because he was out there stinking Phillies. That kind of talk. The goddamn Eagles. Every time it's the most malicious, nasty stands. I was out there
They
a couple
are
months
nasty
ago.
fans, aren't they?
It was like being in the Coliseum out there,
And
the
yet,
ancient Coliseum.
And yet you thrive on it. You like it.
Well,
That's who
I'm
you
a
are?
little look. I root for these players. I
Yeah.
root for them, McNabb and all these guys. And every time you root for them, but the Phillies, there's something about the Philly fans.
What were you going to say? Every
There's
time you root for them,
no,
you're
but
disappointed?
tell me about it. It's like that old Irish saying, there's no sense being Irish if you don't know the world's going to break your heart. There's no sense being a Philly fan without knowing it's going to break your heart. Because in the end, they're uneven, and they win enough that, we're going to do it, and they do it again. It's like, it's Gene Mark. Gene Mark's still here from 64. The Gee Whiz kids, they're still floating around out there. The Philly choke is a problem. The Philly choke is different than the Sox curse the Bambino. It's a particular thing that has to do with setting up. It's like Peanuts, where every year that Lucy would hold the football. At the last minute, she'd drop it for Charlie Brown, and he'd go fall on his keister.
And he never kicked that football.
No, because she always dropped it. It's like, okay, this year we got to the playoffs.
Yeah. Okay.
Got to the playoffs, and then this team nobody ever heard of, the Rockies got there, and then the Sox. Well, they had a great year. They deserved it. But, you end up rooting for another team in the playoffs. That's what you do.
Okay. Well,
but you know what? I'm still a Phillies fan. I do go for the Skins when I'm down there. I live down there with the Skins. Everybody hates them up here, and they hate us, but all,
Mm-hmm.
But I always watch the Eagles to see if they're going to do it. This year they won this last week. And I was for Philly before Philly was cool. Philly's cool now. Philly is definitely cool.
Philly is cool. That's true.
Penn is cool. The city's cool.
We're cool to have you here.
Hanging around Old City, South Street, all that stuff is much cooler than it was when I was growing up. The only thing I thought of going up was going to Dr. Foxman, the orthodontist downtown. That's what our big day was. Or going to Baines Delicatessen or something. There's nothing. Or Wanamaker's. Is the Eagles still here? Is the Eagles still here really at the Wanamaker's? I think it is. Used to be everybody met at Christmas time with the Eagles, at the Big Eagle.
Chris Matthews, I want to thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Paula.
Oh, you remembered my name.
I'm a politician.
And I want to thank you for joining us at the Drexel interview.